Welcome to Old Heart Stories. The dust that fell upon the Yellow Rose Ranch was not the fine, temporary film of a passing breeze. It was the perpetual weight of Texas in the summer of 1885. A red silt that coated everything. The faded blue paint of the veranda, the brittle spines of the scrub oaks, and the relentless anxiety that settled deep in the chest of Sarah Maxwell. She stood by the fence line, leaning against sun-bleached cedar, the fabric of her simple calico dress clinging damply to her back. 3 years had passed since the influenza had taken Thomas. 3 years of trying to manage 80 head of cattle, 500 acres of unforgiven land, and one increasingly aggressive ledger book that Mr. Silas at the bank used as a weapon. The figures never lied, and they currently screamed of ruin. The silence of the afternoon was broken only by the mournful squeak of the windmills struggling against the dry air, a sound Sarah had long ago come to associate with her own failing strength. She traced a pattern in the dust on the railing, wishing for rain, wishing for a miracle, wishing she could just sit down and not have to get back up for 1,000 years. It was during this moment of absolute bone-deep weariness that she saw him. He approached not on the rutted main road, but across the eastern pasture, walking with a deceptive, unhurried pace that suggested he had nowhere specific to be, yet possessed a destination carved in stone. He was tall, dressed in dark, functional denim that, unlike everything else in the county, appeared freshly laundered and free of dust, as if he carried his own protective atmosphere. A wide-brimmed hat shaded most of his face, but Sarah caught the strong line of his jaw and the quiet competence in the way he moved, not with the swagger of a cowboy, but with the controlled tension of a predator pausing on a cliff edge. As he drew nearer, the heat seemed to intensify, but it was not merely the sun. It was the presence of a man who did not belong, a figure too sharply defined against the soft, crumbling edges of her existence. He stopped a respectful distance from the fence, resting one leather-gloved hand lightly on the cedar post. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through the humming silence. It held no identifiable accent, only a cool, polished tone that spoke of places far removed from the dirt roads of Goliad County. "I hope I haven't disturbed your rest." Sarah straightened, instantly alert, adopting the stiff formality she had practiced since becoming the lady of the house in name, but its struggling servant in reality. "There is no rest to disturb on the Yellow Rose, mister. Only work. What is your business here?" His eyes finally lifted, meeting hers. They were startlingly gray, the color of storm clouds banked high above the horizon, and they were utterly unreadable. They held a depth that made Sarah feel momentarily breathless, as if she had looked into a place too vast and too distant for her simple world. "My name is James," he said. "I've been traveling. I heard in town that this place, the Yellow Rose, was having trouble securing hands for the summer drive." Sarah laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humor. "Hands? Mr. James, I can barely afford the feed, much less a proper wage. I have one boy, Jimmy, who does the chores, and myself. That's all." James merely nodded, his gaze sweeping over the deteriorating corral, the splintered feed troughs, and finally settling on the weary slump of Sarah's shoulders. He was assessing her as clinically as he might assess an injured horse. "I don't require a wage, ma'am," he stated, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious. "Not cash, anyway." Sarah narrowed her eyes. This was the part where men usually revealed their true intentions, and in her experience, those intentions rarely benefited a lone widow in debt. "And what is it you do require, James?" He pushed his hat back just enough to reveal a high forehead and a slight tension around his mouth. "Shelter, food, for 3 months. I will take on the debt labor, the fencing, the branding, the repairs your foreman usually handles. I can promise you, ma'am, you've never had a harder worker or one more dedicated to seeing a job finished." The sheer audacity of the offer stopped her protest. 3 months of skilled labor for just room and board? It was unbelievable. It was also potentially salvation. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "A man of your capabilities could earn 5 times that in San Antonio or working on the railroad. Why here for nothing?" James's gray eyes flickered, the only outward sign of hesitation. A tiny, almost imperceptible shadow crossed his features, a fleeting darkness that hinted at a past she dared not pry into. "Let us say I have certain reasons to remain quiet for a time," he replied, his tone final. "This is the last place anyone would look for a man like me. I need the isolation, and you, Mrs. Maxwell, desperately need the help. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement, a business transaction." Sarah looked away, across the parched fields that shimmered in the afternoon heat. She didn't know what troubled James or why he sought refuge on the dusty edge of nowhere. But she knew the alternative, losing the ranch that Thomas had worked his life for, watching Mr. Silas auction off the last of her inheritance. She had exhausted every avenue of pride and practicality. Only desperation remained. "A business transaction," she echoed, tasting the dryness in her mouth. "You understand, if you set foot on this property, you work. From sunrise until the sun drops, no exceptions. And you are here only for labor, nothing else. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, ma'am." He gave a slow, measured nod. "When do I start?" The deal was struck beneath the relentless Texas sun, sealed not with a handshake, but with a silent, intense understanding of necessity. Sarah unlatched the gate, the rusted hinges shrieking a protest that sounded like a warning. James stepped onto the land of the yellow rose. He did not immediately head for the house. Instead, he dropped his saddlebag beside the fence and walked the perimeter of the corral, his hands tucked into his pockets, his head tilted. He was observing, calculating, already taking possession of the problems that were slowly drowning her. As he moved, Sarah watched the easy swing of his shoulders, the powerful definition in his frame. She was acutely aware that she had just invited a complete stranger, a man with deep, undisclosed secrets and eyes that promised danger, into the closest proximity of her life. She had traded the manageable threat of financial ruin for the utterly unknown jeopardy of James. The Yellow Rose had always been a solitary place, heavy with the memory of the love she had lost. But now, as James turned back toward her, the space between them suddenly crackled with a new, potent tension, a silent challenge that had nothing to do with fencing and everything to do with the human heart. Sarah stood rooted to the spot, a sudden cold premonition settling over her, distinct from the Texas heat. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that this transaction, this arrangement born of pure desperation, was not going to stay purely business for long. His hidden past might be chasing him, but whatever darkness James carried, she instinctively understood that it would eventually catch up to her too. And in the process, it might just break her, or, perhaps, finally set her free. 3 months had passed like thirsty minutes in a desert. 3 months where the skeletal remains of the Yellow Rose Ranch had slowly put on muscle thanks to the relentless labor of James. He was a man made of purpose and quiet strength. He had mended every broken fence line, restored the well, and taught Sarah how to shoot the rifle without flinching. She had learned more about his capabilities than his past. He never spoke of the time before he arrived in Texas, and she had stopped asking. The need to survive, to keep her land, had long ago morphed into a dangerous, searing affection that eclipsed prudent curiosity. When James worked, his brow furrowed in concentration, she would often find herself tracing the line of his jaw from a distance, terrified of the depth of the feeling that had rooted itself inside her. The transaction, as she had first called it, was long over. They shared meals at the salvaged pine table, ate the dust of the fields together, and shared a silence at twilight that was fuller and more truthful than any conversation. They were two broken things finding temporary, desperate peace in the proximity of the other. The jeopardy of James, Sarah realized, was not the risk of being robbed, but the inevitable risk of being loved. It was late August, the heat pressing down on the ranch house like a tangible weight. They sat on the narrow front porch. Sarah was shelling peas into a metal basin, and James was sharpening a scythe, the rhythmic hiss of steel against stone the only sound besides the cicadas. Then the rhythm broke. A distant sound of galloping horses, too fast, too numerous for simple travelers. James's hand stopped instantly, freezing the scythe mid-stroke. The relaxed posture he usually wore around her vanished, replaced by the taut stillness of a coiled spring. His eyes, fixed on the road that snaked toward them, were suddenly cold and entirely unfamiliar. "Sarah," his voice was low, a rumble deep in his chest. "Take the rifle inside, now." She looked up, fear gripping her throat, tighter than any lasso. 3 riders burst into view, kicking up an angry cloud of Texas dust. They wore the dust-stained jackets and badges of officialdom, U.S. Marshals or deputies, too far from the county seat for a friendly visit. James didn't move. He stood, tall and imposing, separating her from the threat. The sun glinted off the blade in his hand, but he made no move to use it. He looked like a man who knew his fate had finally caught him. The lead rider pulled up sharply, his horse rearing slightly, its hooves digging deep gouges in the sun-baked earth. The deputy, a burly man with a thick, unforgiving mustache, fixed his gaze on James. "Well, well, if it ain't the ghost of the Kansas line," the deputy spat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Took us longer than expected, Miller." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Miller, not James. The peas spilled forgotten from her lap onto the wooden porch. She looked at the man she loved, the man who had resurrected her life, and saw only the rigid back of a stranger. James didn't flinch at the name, but his shoulders tightened fractionally. He didn't deny it. "What do you want, Sheriff?" "Want? We want you, Miller. The statute of limitations on grand larceny and obstruction of justice hasn't run its course in Dodge yet. You fled bail. Your little foray into honest living is over. Larceny, obstruction." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, stifling a cry. She felt the ground shifting beneath her, the comfortable world they had built together shattering like cheap glass. James, her James, was a wanted criminal. "You know that warrant is tainted, Randall," James said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying the unmistakable weight of a man who had already argued this point 100 times in his mind. "I didn't take that money. I was investigating the theft myself." "Doesn't matter what you say you were doing, Miller. It matters what the court recorded. And it matters what we see here. A fugitive hiding behind a widow's skirt." The deputy smirked, glancing pointedly at Sarah, who was trembling, unable to speak. James took a slow step forward, away from Sarah, pushing his own shadow between her and the threat. The deputy laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Didn't know? You think we rode 3 states for a casual visit? You think we didn't ask around? The whole county knows the widow Banning took in a stray hand. Seems the stray hand forgot to mention he used to wear a badge before he ran when the heat came down." Sarah finally found her voice, thin and reedy. "A badge? You were a lawman?" James turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. In them, she saw not the danger she had first suspected, but deep, profound shame and a desperate sort of love. "Sarah, please," he began, his voice rough. "It was complicated. It was corrupt. I was framed, yes, but I still made mistakes. I should have told you." "Told me?" she repeated, the betrayal tasting metallic on her tongue. "Told me that the man sleeping under my roof, saving my ranch, the man who was supposed to be my partner, was running from the law? You traded my financial ruin for the ruin of my reputation, James. What did you think would happen when they found you?" The deputy took advantage of the distraction. "Come on, Miller. Let's finish this before the sun goes down." He reached for the ropes on his saddle. James ignored him, his entire focus burning solely on Sarah. He saw the cold, terrified distance in her eyes, the crushing realization of how thoroughly he had deceived her. This was the moment his secret had promised, the instant she realized the cost of trusting him. "I thought I would fix your ranch," James confessed, the words torn from him. "I thought I would earn enough time to tell you everything, to prove to you who I was now, not who they claimed I was then. I risked coming here because I didn't care about the risk anymore, Sarah. I only cared about you. I love you. That ranch, it saved me. And you showed me that I didn't have to be Miller the fugitive anymore." He spoke with an intensity that pulled at the very core of her disbelief. Larceny and run-in were one thing. The depth of pain in his eyes was another. The deputy snapped. "That's enough of the parlor poetry. We're going, Miller. Resisting arrest only makes it worse." He drew his pistol, aiming it at James's chest. James did not move, did not reach for his own concealed weapon. He stood rigid, looking only at Sarah, offering himself up like a sacrifice before her judgment. "You told me once that the yellow rose was all you had left," he said quietly. "If I fight them, they'll tear this place apart. They'll implicate you. I won't let that happen." He swallowed hard. "I'll go with them, Sarah. I'll clear my name, or I'll face the consequences. But I need to know you believe me, not about the money, but about us, about everything that happened on this land." Sarah felt the world spin. The choice was agonizingly clear. Protect the ranch by letting the criminal be taken away, securing her reputation and future, or step forward and protect the man she loved, even if it meant confirming the deputy's worst accusations and risking everything she had fought to keep. She looked at James, at his broad shoulders, at the honest sweat he'd poured into her soil, at the tender, careful way he had kissed her the night before. His crime was in the past, a history she couldn't change. But the man standing before her, willing to surrender his freedom to protect her good name, was undeniably hers. With a surge of resolve that warmed the terrifying chill in her heart, Sarah stood up, facing the deputy. The scattered peas crunched under her boots. "He's not going anywhere," she announced, her voice trembling slightly, but firming on the last word. The deputy squinted at her. "Ma'am, you better stand back. This is law business." "This is my ranch," Sarah retorted, moving slowly until she stood shoulder to shoulder with James. She reached out and deliberately, publicly, took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his calloused palm. "And he is under my protection. You say he's a fugitive, and maybe he is, but the only thing he stole was my heart, and he's earned the right to keep it." A profound silence descended, thick with dust and disbelief. James gripped her hand fiercely, his eyes wide with surprise and a blinding gratitude. He hadn't expected her defense. "You are obstructing the law, Widow Banning," the deputy warned, raising his pistol higher. "You can take him," Sarah said, refusing to break eye contact with the deputy, clutching James's hand as if she could fuse their bones together. "But you'll have to take me too. I will ride with him to the jail. I will hire the lawyers, and I will testify on his behalf. I will tell them everything he's done here, the good man he has been, and the truth of why he ran. And I will make sure the entire territory knows that you came onto my land and threatened an innocent man who was only trying to make amends." She looked straight at the barrel of the gun, and fear dissolved into cold, clear purpose. She had faced ruin before, faced death in the eyes of her husband's disease. She would not hide from this.
James squeezed her hand, a tremor running through his powerful frame. He looked down at her, and the distance in his eyes evaporated, replaced by a devastating surge of love. He was free, not because of the law, but because she had chosen him, wreckage and all. He finally spoke, his voice low, intimate, meant only for her. "I love you, Sarah." "Then we fight them," she whispered back, leaning slightly into him, a silent vow of unwavering allegiance. The deputy, seeing the unyielding unity, the solid wall of their resistance, hesitated. Taking one fugitive was manageable. Taking a reputable Texas widow and turning the event into a scandal that would follow him back to Kansas was not. The law was often more afraid of bad publicity than they were of gunfights. After a long, agonizing moment, the deputy slowly lowered his weapon. "Fine, Miller. You got yourself a woman who's crazier than you are. We'll be back."
"We'll secure the extradition through the Texas courts, properly this time. But don't think you're safe." With a sharp command, the deputy wheeled his horse around. The three men retreated the way they had come, leaving behind only the unsettled dust and the roar of the silence. Sarah and James stood on the porch, their hands still intertwined, watching the dust cloud fade into the horizon. The danger had retreated, but the conflict had changed them forever. "Sarah," James said, turning fully to face her, his gaze searching hers, looking for lingering doubt or regret. "Don't," she interrupted, pressing a finger gently against his lips. "I meant it. We fight them, together." She finally let go of his hand, only to wrap her arms tightly around his waist, burying her face against his chest, inhaling the scent of sun, sweat, and honest hard work. The past was grim, the future uncertain, but for the first time since she became a widow, Sarah was not alone. She had traded the manageable threat of ruin for the beautiful, terrifying, absolute jeopardy of love. And in that moment, James Miller, the fugitive, the savior, the lawman, held her close. Having been truly accepted, secrets and all, finally set free by the heart of the woman who chose him over everything. The silence that followed the retreat of the deputy was not empty. It was the heavy, echoing sound of a life irrevocably changed. For Sarah, the scent of gunpowder and the bitter taste of fear were quickly replaced by the sweet, terrifying realization that she had laid her entire future on the line for a man who carried a haunted past like a shroud. But the silence did not last long. The fight was far from over. It had merely moved from the dusty yard to the long, laborious halls of justice. The subsequent months were a relentless, consuming struggle. James, now stripped of his anonymity and the comfort of lies, was forced to confront his former life head-on. They had known the threat would return, and return it did, not with a sudden assault, but with the slow, grinding pressure of legal paperwork and demands for extradition, executed properly this time through the state courts. Sarah proved herself more formidable in the polished corridors of the county seat than she ever was wielding a rifle. She mortgaged the last viable piece of land, not for the ranch, but for the best legal counsel Texas could afford, a sharp-tongued lawyer from Dallas who specialized in federal overreach. She presented the evidence of James's quiet, dedicated work on the SSS, the witnesses who spoke of his integrity, and the glaring inconsistencies in the original claims that had chased him across 3 territories. She argued not just for James Miller, the fugitive, but for James, the honest ranch hand, the man who had brought life back to a dying homestead, the man she loved. It was a battle fought on paper and through testimony, a painful stripping away of James's protective layers. He had to trust Sarah utterly, placing his destiny entirely in her capable hands. The lawyer argued that the charges were too old, the witnesses unreliable, and the original jurisdiction questionable. More importantly, Sarah's public support, her fierce loyalty, shifted the narrative.
The community, always ready to protect its own, began to see James not as an outsider fleeing justice, but a good man unfairly hunted. The silence that followed the retreat of the deputy was not empty. It was the heavy, echoing sound of a life irrevocably changed. For Sarah, the scent of gunpowder and the bitter taste of fear were quickly replaced by the sweet, terrifying realization that she had laid her entire future on the line for a man who carried a haunted past like a shroud. But the silence did not last long. The fight was far from over. It had merely moved from the dusty yard to the long, laborious halls of justice. The subsequent months were a relentless, consuming struggle. James, now stripped of his anonymity and the comfort of lies, was forced to confront his former life head-on. They had known the threat would return, and return it did, not with a sudden assault, but with the slow, grinding pressure of legal paperwork and demands for extradition, executed properly this time through the state courts. Sarah proved herself more formidable in the polished corridors of the county seat than she ever was wielding a rifle. She mortgaged the last viable piece of land, not for the ranch, but for the best legal counsel Texas could afford, a sharp-tongued lawyer from Dallas who specialized in federal overreach. She presented the evidence of James's quiet, dedicated work on the SSS, the witnesses who spoke of his integrity, and the glaring inconsistencies in the original claims that had chased him across 3 territories. She argued not just for James Miller, the fugitive, but for James, the honest ranch hand, the man she loved. It was a battle fought on paper and through testimony, a painful stripping away of James's protective layers. He had to trust Sarah utterly, placing his destiny entirely in her capable hands. The lawyer argued that the charges were too old, the witnesses unreliable, and the original jurisdiction questionable. More importantly, Sarah's public support, her fierce loyalty, shifted the narrative. The community, always ready to protect its own, began to see James not as an outsider fleeing justice, but a good man unfairly hunted. The resolution, when it finally came, nearly a year later, was not a resounding declaration of pure innocence. The frontier rarely offered such clean edges. Instead, the Texas courts refused the extradition, citing insufficient current evidence and jurisdictional disputes. The case against James Miller, the charges related to the messy aftermath of his final failed assignment, was quietly dismissed in Texas, effectively ending the threat. He was a free man, bound only by his word and the invisible chain of his love for the woman who had fought for his life. A deeper, more abiding peace settled upon the SSS ranch, a peace earned not through retreat, but through relentless defense. 2 years stretched between that tense moment on the porch and the life they now shared, years marked by the sweat of honest labor and the quiet, continuous growth of their connection. They stood now on the same porch, bathed in the soft, bruised gold of a late Texas afternoon. The ranch was prosperous, the cattle healthy, and the main house was no longer merely maintained, but loved.
Sarah had replaced the faded curtains with cheerful gingham, and James had built a rocking chair for the porch, a structure of solid oak that creaked a gentle rhythm against the boards. Sarah leaned against the sturdy rail, her hair, now lighter from the sun, tied back with a practical ribbon. She watched James, who was mending a bridle, his large hands moving with the deliberate, patient skill that always reassured her. He was still quiet, still carried the watchful intensity of a man who once had to look over his shoulder. But the tension had softened around his eyes. He was no longer James Miller, the fugitive. He was James, her partner, the co-owner of the ranch, the solid foundation upon which her life was built. "You're watching me again, Sarah," he murmured, not looking up, the leather squeaking softly under the pressure of his awl. She smiled, a slow, deep smile that reached her eyes. "I am allowed. I own the view, after all." He finally raised his head, his gaze meeting hers, clear and unwavering. "You own a good deal more than the view, I reckon." She walked toward him, placing her hand gently on his arm, feeling the taut muscle beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "Remember that spring," she began, her voice low, "when you first told me the truth? I was so afraid. I thought I would lose the one thing that had brought me back to life." James carefully laid the bridle down. He took her hands in his thumbs brushing slow, calming circles over her skin. "You were the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me, Sarah. You made me want to stop running, and running was all I knew how to do." He had spent years surviving, adapting, always ready for the next departure. Sarah had taught him the profound, terrifying power of staying. She had taught him a home out of the very land he had planned only to temporarily inhabit. "You took the risk," she insisted. "You let down your guard, and you faced the deputy, and then the courts. You did it for us." "No," he corrected her softly, pulling her closer until the faint, familiar scent of wood smoke and leather enveloped her. "I did it because you showed me what I was fighting for. Before you, I was fighting to escape a memory. With you, I was fighting for a future I knew I couldn't bear to lose." They stood there, wrapped in the golden silence of the setting sun, two souls weathered by the harsh realities of the frontier and polished smooth by the persistent friction of true affection. The Triple S Ranch was more than just land and cattle. It was the concrete, undeniable testament to their choice, the choice to put love above fear, hope above history. The future held its certain challenges, for the frontier was never truly safe. There would be drought, harsh winters, and the predictable avarice of neighbors. But they faced those threats together, a unified front against the world. Sarah, the widow who had found a fierce, quiet joy, and James, the outsider, who had finally found the place where his heart could rest, unbound and unafraid. He bent his head, pressing a kiss to her brow, a long, tender promise. "Home, Sarah," he whispered against her skin. "This is home." And as the sun dipped beneath the rugged Texas horizon, casting the ranch in long purple shadows, Sarah tightened her arms around him, understanding that home was not the acreage, the house, or the stability they had rebuilt. Home was simply the sanctuary found in the steadfast strength of the man holding her, the fugitive who had traded his solitary freedom for the enduring, beautiful jeopardy of a shared life. They had survived the secret, and in surviving, they had built a love stronger than any shame, deeper than any debt, and more resilient than the dusty, unforgiving land they stood upon. Their story, begun in desperation and danger, had settled into the quiet, powerful certainty of forever. Thank you for watching Old Heart Stories. Please subscribe for more stories from the past. This video has been brought to you by Image Prompts for Main Characters. Image 1. A cinematic medium close-up shot of Sarah, 30s, strong features, wearing a simple yet authentic 1885 calico ranch dress, hair slightly undone, and James, late 30s, rugged, defined jawline, wearing a dark woolen vest over a chambray shirt, slightly dusty. They are positioned inside a dimly lit, high-ceilinged barn. James has gently pinned Sarah against a stack of hay bales, his expression intense and conflicted. Sarah is reaching up, her fingers tentatively touching the lapel of his vest, a silent plea for honesty in her eyes, mixed with undeniable passion. The atmosphere is thick with unspoken secrets and raw intimacy. Lighting is dramatic chiaroscuro, originating from a single low-hanging oil lantern that casts harsh highlights on their faces and deep, mysterious shadows behind them, emphasizing the texture of the rough wood and scattered straw. Hyper-realistic, 8K, deeply emotional atmosphere, deep focus. R 16:9, style raw, V 5.2. Image 2. A breathtaking cinematic wide shot of Sarah and James standing shoulder to shoulder on the weathered wooden porch of their Texas ranch house, bathed in the rich, fiery light of a dramatic sunset after a rain. Sarah, wearing a dark, tailored 1880s bustled skirt, high-necked blouse, her posture conveying newfound resilience, is leaning slightly against James. James, tall, wearing a clean, dark duster coat, wide-brimmed Stetson hat casting a shadow over his eyes, one arm securely around her waist, looks resolute. Their gaze is fixed on the vast, open, debt-free land stretching toward the horizon. The moment is one of quiet triumph and mutual protection against the overwhelming landscape. The lighting is intense golden hour backlighting, creating a stunning cinematic grandeur and making the edges of their clothing glow. The air is clear, enhancing the hyper-realistic detail of the distant mesas and the worn texture of the porch railing. 8K, accurate 1885 frontier fashion, emotional atmosphere.